My name is Bridgetet, and at 27, I never imagined I'd be fighting my own parents for the $10 million estate my grandparents left me. They raised me when my parents abandoned me at 7, gave me everything they never did love, stability, and a moral compass that kept me standing when the world tried to break me. 6 months after my graduation, when my grandfather passed away, I honored his final wish by securing the inheritance inside a trust. I thought that would be enough to protect his legacy and me. I was wrong. Last week, my parents and sister showed up at my door, smiling the kind of smiles that awaken every childhood fear. If you've ever had to protect what's rightfully yours from the very people who should have protected you, then you'll understand what I'm about to say. I was 4 when the instability began. My earliest memories aren't bedtime stories or birthdays. They're the smell of stale liquor, the sound of slurred shouting, and the blur of strangers drifting through our tiny apartment like ghosts. My father, Jackson, worked construction when he wasn't drinking or disappearing. My mother, Diana, called herself an actress, though her auditions happened mostly at night and ended with her manic or collapsed for days. My sister, Alicia, 3 years older, was my shield. She rationed cereal when the fridge was empty, taught me when to hide in the closet, when to be silent, and when to pretend to sleep. Then, one morning, our parents told us we were going on an adventure. They drove us to my grandparents' house, a beautiful colonial home that smelled of roses and furniture polish, and told us they'd be back in a week. They never came back. My grandparents Harold and Margaret Sullivan became my world. Grandfather was strict but gentle, a self-made businessman who believed wealth was a tool, not a trophy. Grandmother was warmth personified, always elegant, always patient. They filed for guardianship when it became clear my parents had vanished. Alicia, already hard inside, refused to stay. "I'm going to live with Jessica," she said, referring to her friend whose parents offered to take her in. I didn't understand it then, but she couldn't face another family. She needed distance, not safety. So it was just me. My grandparents never spoke badly of my parents, but I overheard enough to know there were debts, police reports, and burned bridges. They protected me fiercely, gave me chores, stability, and unconditional love. Grandmother taught me to bake and garden. Grandfather taught me math and patience. They saved money for my education, teaching me about compound interest before I even knew what algebra was. He used to say, "Wealth that's displayed is wealth diminished." By the time I was 15, my life had settled into peaceful rhythm. The trauma of my early years became a faint shadow. The house was my sanctuary, grandfather in his study, grandmother pruning roses, and me doing homework on the porch swing. They never spoiled me, but they trusted me. When I turned 18, I got my acceptance letter from Columbia University. Grandmother made roast chicken that night, and grandfather opened champagne. "For moments that matter," he said, smiling with pride. At college, I studied finance and law. I wanted to understand the systems that gave people power, the same ones my grandparents had mastered. Then, during my sophomore year, my world cracked. Grandmother fell ill, cancer, aggressive, fast. I begged to take time off, but she refused. "Your education is non-negotiable," she said over our last Sunday dinner together. "I need to know you're building your life while I fight for mine." I came home every weekend, helping with treatments, watching her fade but never break. She died the spring of my senior year. Grandfather aged a decade in a night. I stayed home that summer, cooking, cleaning, and keeping him company. He tried to be strong, but I could see grief hollowing him out. His heart literally weakened. Still, he came to my graduation thin, fragile, but glowing with pride. "You are the daughter of our hearts," he whispered after the ceremony. 2 weeks later, he called me into his study. "Bridget, I need to prepare you," he said, his voice tired but steady. "Your father's reached out twice in the past month asking for money. When I refused, he made threats about his rights as my son." He sighed, closing the ledger in front of him. "When I'm gone, they might come back. Be ready." I wanted to dismiss his worry, but something in his eyes said, Knowing made my stomach twist. He was right. 6 months after graduation, he passed away quietly in his sleep. I found him during his afternoon nap, peaceful, the sunlight warm across his face. The funeral was small. Alicia came. My parents didn't. At the will reading, I sat alone across from Patrick Sullivan, my grandfather's attorney. He read each line carefully, his voice echoing softly in the paneled office. Everything, every cent, every share, every brick of the estate was left to me. Patrick handed me a letter afterward, folded neatly in my grandfather's familiar hand. My dearest Bridget, if you're reading this, I've gone to join Margaret. You are the best of us. The inheritance you receive is not a reward, it's a responsibility. Use it wisely. Protect it fiercely. But I must warn you, your parents' debts remain, and they may seek to exploit you. Consider placing the inheritance in a trust. Your real inheritance, my dear, is not money. It is discernment. Trust your instincts. They are excellent. All my love. Grandfather. I wept. For him, for her, for the safety I'd lost again. Within 2 weeks, I met with Patrick and established an irrevocable trust. It would allow me to live comfortably, but it locked the principal beyond anyone's reach, including mine, without oversight. 3 days after signing the papers, my phone rang. Bridget, it's Dad. I froze. We're in town, he said cheerfully. Thought it was time we all reconnected as a family. After 20 years, just like that. They arrived Friday at 6. When I opened the door, time warped. My father looked bloated, his nose veined red from decades of drink. My mother, still slim and sharp, wore a perfume too sweet for sincerity. And behind them stood Alicia, older, polished, but distant. Bridget, my mother exclaimed, hugging me as if she hadn't left me on a doorstep as a child. You're so beautiful, just like I always knew you'd be. Hey, kiddo? My father said awkwardly, eyes scanning the house behind me. Nice place. Alicia nodded stiffly. Bridget. I led them to the dining room, grandmother's china on the table, candles flickering. The air felt tight with ghosts. Dinner began pleasantly enough, but it didn't take long. My father's casual questions about how well Harold did with his hardware stores quickly soured the air. He was successful, I said simply. Must have left quite the nest egg, he pressed, carving his roast like a man cutting into opportunity. Dad, Alicia warned softly. He waved her off. Just curious. Family should be transparent, right? My mother leaned forward, her smile wide and rehearsed. We've been working on a new business venture, health and wellness. Really booming right now. We just need a little startup capital to get it off the ground. It's going to be huge. Sweetheart. I smiled tightly. I'm sure it will be. After dessert, my father asked for a tour. His eyes lingered on the locked drawers in grandfather's study. Where's Dad's coin collection? He asked casually. In secure storage, I replied. He didn't hide his disappointment well. Before leaving, my mother said, we're staying at the Riverside Hotel, but thinking of making it permanent. We've missed you. Sweetheart, we want to make up for lost time. How long are you staying? I asked. Well, my father interjected, depends on how some business opportunities pan out. Maybe we can grab lunch tomorrow, father-daughter time. I agreed, out of curiosity more than affection. After they left, I sat in my grandmother's armchair, the scent of her rose-scented candles still faint in the room. I didn't feel family warmth, I felt danger. The next morning, I called Patrick. He listened, his brow furrowed. They're probing. Be careful. He was right again. That lunch would change everything. The next day, I met my father at a small Italian cafe downtown. It was bright and airy, full of chatter and the smell of roasted garlic, but all I could taste was dread. He arrived late, of course, in a faded blazer and sunglasses that couldn't hide the exhaustion in his face. Bridget, he greeted, smiling as if we'd had Sunday dinners together all my life. You look great. Sweetheart. I nodded politely, my stomach in knots. You said you wanted to talk about something important. He leaned back, flashing that salesman grin I remembered from childhood, the one that used to charm strangers out of their last bit of sympathy. I just want to rebuild. You know, with you, with this family. I know things were rough, but I've turned things around. I said nothing. He continued, swirling his coffee like it was a performance prop. Your mother and I, well, we've had our ups and downs, but we're working on something big. It's a startup. We're calling it Renew You. Health retreats, spa services, holistic supplement stuff people can't get enough of these days. I stared at him, unsure whether to laugh or cry. You want me to invest? He blinked, pretending to be offended. No, no, sweetheart, not invest, partner. Your family. It's an opportunity. I sighed, I'm not interested. His smile faltered for the first time. I'm not asking for charity. I'm asking for a little help, a small loan to get us going. I met his gaze evenly. You've already had 20 years of help from my grandparents. He stiffened, setting down his cup. You think you're better than me now, don't you? Sitting there with your fancy degree and your fancy inheritance. My grandparents' inheritance, I interrupted. The people who actually earned it. The mask slipped. His eyes hardened. You're my daughter, Bridget. That means what's theirs is mine. You wouldn't even have it if not for us. I felt my pulse spike. If not for you. You left me on their doorstep and vanished. You didn't raise me. You didn't feed me. You didn't want me until money was involved. His voice dropped low. Watch your tone. I almost laughed. What are you going to do? Walk out again? He stood, slamming a few bills on the table. You've always been ungrateful, just like your grandmother, self-righteous and cold. She was the only warm thing in my life, I said softly. He turned and left without another word. When I got home, my hands were shaking. I sat in my grandfather's old armchair, trying to breathe through the rage and grief that clawed up my throat. I could almost hear his voice, protect it fiercely. That night, Alicia called. You shouldn't have provoked him, she said. He's angry. He's always angry, I replied. What does he want now? There was a pause, then quietly. They're talking to a lawyer. My blood went cold. What? They're saying the will was unfair, that Grandpa was manipulated. They're going to challenge it. I gripped the phone so tightly it hurt. That's insane. There's no basis for it. Maybe not, she said, her voice trembling. But they're desperate. I ended the call and sat in the dark for a long time, staring at the house that had once been a symbol of love, now a fortress under siege. The following week, I met Patrick, the family attorney. Again, he'd been handling my grandfather's affairs for over 30 years, and his calm professionalism was the only thing keeping me grounded. They filed the challenge this morning, he said, sliding a folder across the desk. They're claiming undue influence, that Harold was coerced into leaving you everything. I laughed bitterly. By who? A ghost grandma's been gone for years. He nodded. It's flimsy. They don't have evidence, but they're hoping to force a settlement. Over my dead body, I said. He smiled faintly. Spoken like your grandfather. Still, as I read the documents, I felt something crack inside. The betrayal wasn't surprising, but it still hurt like a reopened wound. Weeks passed. The legal process dragged on, and every new filing was another dagger. My parents painted me as greedy, unstable, manipulative and ungrateful child who had brainwashed her dying grandfather into disinheriting his real family. I stopped checking social media after a cousin posted a public rant calling me a spoiled snake. Only Alicia remained on the edge, apologetic but silent. She never joined their attacks, but she never defended me either. Then one evening, just before the court's preliminary hearing, she showed up at my door. She looked nervous, eyes darting around like a spy. Can I come in? I hesitated, then stepped aside. She walked through the house slowly, touching the walls, the furniture. It's strange, she murmured. Being here again. What do you want, Alicia? I asked quietly. She turned to face me. They're planning something. My stomach dropped. What do you mean? They're going to claim Grandpa wasn't of sound mind when he signed the trust, she said. They found an old doctor who's willing to testify he had cognitive decline. I felt dizzy. That's a lie. I know, she said, but they're paying him. And they've been digging through Grandma's old journals trying to twist her words. I sank into a chair, covering my face. Why are you telling me this? Because I can't watch them destroy you, she said. You're the only one who ever tried to hold this family together. I didn't see it back then, but I do now. Tears stung my eyes. You could testify. Tell the court the truth. She hesitated. If I do that, they'll disown me. I laughed hollowly. They already have. She looked at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You're right. That night, she emailed Patrick her statement, a detailed, signed affidavit confirming our father's long history of financial manipulation and our grandfather's clear mental competence. It was the beginning of the end. In court, my parents sat across from me, smug and venomous. But when Alicia's statement was read aloud, their confidence shattered. My mother's face went pale. My father whispered something sharp enough to make her flinch. When the judge ruled the trust valid and dismissed their claim with prejudice, my knees nearly gave out. I won, but it didn't feel like victory, it felt like grief. Afterward, outside the courthouse, Alicia hugged me. I'm sorry for everything, she whispered. For leaving you, for pretending it didn't matter. I held her tightly. You came back when it counted. She smiled through tears. He'd be proud of you, you know. I hope so, I said softly. I'm just tired. That night, I returned home and sat in my grandfather's study. The house was quiet, the way it always was after storms. I opened the drawer of his old desk and pulled out his letter again. Trust your instincts, they are excellent. He was right. I poured myself a glass of wine and looked out at the rose garden. Grandmother's garden blooming in the soft evening light. For the first time in months, I breathed without fear. Family had tried to destroy me. Love had saved me. And somewhere, I felt their presence steady, silent, proud. The days that followed the court victory felt strangely hollow. Everyone around me congratulated me, Patrick. My coworkers, even neighbors who'd heard whispers of the family scandal. They said things like, "You must feel vindicated," or "You showed them." But I didn't feel triumphant, I felt empty. It was as if I had been holding my breath for months, years. Really, and now that I could finally exhale. The silence afterward was deafening. The night after the verdict, I dreamt of my grandparents, grandmother in her rose garden, wearing her sun hat, pruning carefully, grandfather sitting in his study, ledger open, humming that same tune he used to when he balanced the books. In the dream, they didn't say anything. They just looked at me, calm, proud, and I woke up crying, because for the first time in so long, I felt like a child again, safe and seen. But the peace didn't last. 3 days later, there was a knock on my door. When I opened it, Alicia stood there again. Her face was pale, and she looked like she hadn't slept. "They're gone," she said. I blinked. "What do you mean?" "Mom and Dad," she whispered. "They disappeared. Packed up everything from that motel and vanished." For a long moment, I just stared at her. Then I felt the coldness creep back in. "They'll turn up when they need money." She shook her head. "No, Bridget, you don't get it. They sold their car, closed their accounts. There's nothing left." A chill ran through me, but I said nothing. Some part of me wasn't even surprised. People like my parents didn't end things cleanly, they imploded. Alicia stayed with me for the weekend, and we barely spoke. She slept in the guest room, and I could hear her tossing and turning at night. On Sunday morning, she came into the kitchen while I was making tea. "Do you ever think about forgiving them?" she asked softly. I stirred my cup. "Forgiveness isn't the same as letting them hurt me again." "I know," she said, "but sometimes I wonder if holding on to anger is its own kind of cage." I looked at her, and for a second, I saw the older sister who once shielded me from shouting parents and empty fridges. "I'm not angry anymore," I said quietly. "I'm just done." She nodded slowly. "I think I am too." Over the next few months, life began to stitch itself back together. The trust continued to grow under Patrick's management. I returned to work at the investment firm where I'd started my career, though this time I did it on my terms. My grandparents' estate became something more than property, it became purpose. I created a scholarship in their name for foster youth pursuing higher education. I donated to local shelters, especially those for women escaping abuse. Every decision I made felt like lighting a candle in the dark corners my parents had left behind. And yet, every so often, I'd receive strange reminders of them postcards with no return address. Messages scribbled in familiar handwriting. "We're sorry. We just wanted a chance. Please don't hate us." I never replied, but I kept them all in a box in my grandfather's desk, tucked beneath the letter he'd left me. Alicia moved nearby, working as a social worker for at-risk teens. She came over for dinner every Sunday. We rebuilt something fragile but real, two survivors trying to redefine what family could mean when blood had betrayed us. Then one evening, nearly a year after the court case, Patrick called. "Bridget," he said carefully, "I think you should come to my office. There's something you need to see." When I arrived, he slid an envelope across the table. Inside was a notice, a bank account registered under my father's name, recently flagged for suspicious transactions. Attached was a note in his handwriting. "To my daughters, for what it's worth. I'm sorry. The money left here is what I could salvage. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope you find peace." I looked up, confused. "How much?" "About 80,000, Patrick said quietly. "Small compared to what he tried to take, but it's something." I stared at the paper, my throat tight. "Where did it come from?" He sighed. Apparently, he'd been working construction again, legitimately. This time, maybe he was trying to make things right in his own way. I closed my eyes, the emotions warring inside me: anger, grief, disbelief, something dangerously close to compassion. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, staring at the rose garden bathed in moonlight. My grandmother used to say that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting, it was about freeing yourself from the story others forced you to carry. Maybe she was right. Months passed, and life found a rhythm again. Alicia and I took a trip together to Maine, where our grandparents had once owned a summer cabin. It had been sold years ago, but we found the little coastal town unchanged, same rocky shores, same salt in the air. We stood by the pier one evening, the sunset reflecting on the water. Alicia slipped her arm through mine. "They would have loved this," she whispered. "They would," I said. I thought about everything: the lies, the lawsuits, the betrayal, and the small, quiet moments of redemption that followed. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something close to gratitude. Not for what I lost, but for what I learned. Because pain, as terrible as it is, has a strange way of clarifying the truth. It strips away illusions. It shows you who you are, who others really are, and what you're willing to stand for. And I knew who I was now. Not the abandoned child, not the heiress defending her inheritance, not the victim of a family's greed. I was Bridget Sullivan, the woman my grandparents raised me to be. Strong, steady, unbreakable. One evening, as I was preparing to leave the office, Patrick called again. "There's a final matter from your grandfather's estate," he said. "Something we missed before. I think you should see it yourself." When I arrived, he handed me a small velvet box. Inside was a gold pocket watch, beautifully engraved. On the back, in my grandfather's precise handwriting, were the words, "Time reveals everything." Inside the lid was a folded note in my grandmother's hand. "Love doesn't vanish, it waits for the heart to be ready again." I traced the letters with my thumb, tears slipping silently down my cheek. It wasn't wealth or revenge that mattered. It was this, the quiet knowing that I had honored them, that I had protected their legacy not with greed or bitterness, but with integrity. And maybe, in some strange way, even my parents had finally learned their lesson. Because redemption isn't about justice served, it's about hearts finally learning how to change. If you've ever been betrayed by those you trusted most, know this: what they take from you doesn't define you. What you rebuild afterward does. So keep building, keep standing, and when life tries to shatter your peace, remember you are not what broke you. You are what survived. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more real-life stories about strength, family, and the quiet power of karma. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had to find peace after being betrayed by your own family? End.